And a very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. Well, it's been quite a week of news, and of course, where there is news, there is room for discussion. We are not going to get to everything tonight. Tonight, we want to pay attention to one topic that has gripped the attention of all Guyanese, and that is the government's announcement of a visa ban on Haitians coming to Guyana. This, of course, has been a sore issue that has gone back years. It is very clear from those of us who understand Guyanese politics that the People's Progressive Party has always and will always be concerned about immigrants coming to Guyana, especially from a place like Haiti. That the preoccupation with the politics of numbers reduces everything to that equation. They do not see Haitians coming to Guyana in humanitarian terms. They do not see it in a larger Caribbean perspective. They see it as Haitians coming here increasing the electoral numbers of their opponents. No, one, of course, has to take that into consideration, but one cannot reduce everything to that numbers equation. One has to look, excuse me, at the larger perspective. Next week we'll be celebrating CARICOM Day, and of course, the spirit of CARICOM means that we are sisters and brothers, we are neighbors, and above and beyond the electoral preoccupation, it has to be the preoccupation of Caribbean family. That, for us, is what is paramount. Now, Haiti, as we know, has had a history of denial. And that history of denial goes right back to the Haitian Revolution in 1804, when the Haitians, by their own hands and through force, expelled the colonials, those who had colonized Haiti, had brought the Africans against their will to the Americas, and scatter them across the hemisphere. And in Haiti, which at the turn of the 19th century, was referred to and was in fact the richest sugar colony in the world. What it meant is that it generated revenues for France, which had colonized Haiti. Haiti was the richest sugar colony in the Western Hemisphere. So, in fact, Haiti was the richest country in the Western Hemisphere. And the Haitians struck their blow for their independence with the expectation that they would command their own resources. But 2 decades later, the French, with gunboats and supported by other superpowers like the United States, demanded that Haiti pay France for the revenue that it lost as a result of Haitian independence. And they threatened the Haitians with reimposing colonial rule on that country. They threatened to invade Haiti. And the Haitians struck a truce with them and agreed to pay them back so that they can keep their independence. It took the Haitians 100 years to pay back what is estimated as an equivalent of $30 to $35 billion today. It meant for that period, Haiti was producing all its wealth to give back to the French, or to give to the French. And so it was not a country that was engaged in development for itself, because all its revenues went to pay back France. And they finished paying that around 1925 or so, or thereabout. But before that, in 1915, the Americans invaded Haiti, demanding that Haiti pay back American banks from which they had borrowed money to pay the French. And the Americans stayed there until 1934. They raided the treasury of Haiti during that time. I'm giving you this background so that you can understand the plight of Haitians. That Haiti today is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere economically, having moved from 1804, when they were the richest country in the Western Hemisphere, to the poorest. And the reason for that is that the Western powers never allowed Haiti to prosper. They never allowed Haiti to become the example of what independence means, largely because they did not want the Haitian example to spread to the rest of the Western Hemisphere, to spread to the rest of the colonial world. And so today, Haiti is economically poor because of the intentional attempts by the West, the intentional work by the West to underdevelop that country. And wherever there is underdevelopment, people will reach for opportunities in other places. And so Haitians looking to migrate from Haiti to other parts of the world is expected, given the condition of Haiti. If you ever went to Haiti, what you will see are two countries. One country that is made up of the most resilient people I've ever seen in the world. Haitians are resilient. Some of the more artistic people that you will find anywhere in the world. The most native representation of African culture you will find there. So on the one hand, you will find a Haiti that is culturally rich and a Haiti that is economically poor. And so therefore, when you add that to the natural disasters, we all know 10 years ago what happened with that earthquake in Haiti. We know of the constant mudslides because the earth in Haiti has been so ravaged by years of assault, planting cane, sugarcane, and other crops for the colonials. The land is no longer arable, and whenever there are rains, the soil slides down the hills. So we have these mudslides and the hurricanes. So when you add all of that together, Haiti is a place that is crying out for help. David Rudder, in one of his more famous calypsos, Haiti, said, "Haiti, we are sorry. We misunderstood you. One day we'll turn our heads and look inside you. One day we'll turn our heads and restore your glory." And one cannot fault the English-speaking Caribbean in recent years for making an attempt to help to look inside Haiti and help Haiti to restore its glory. We have that responsibility because those of us who are free today, free from colonial rule, free from slavery, owe it to the example of Haiti. They are our brothers and sisters. They are our example. And as Rhoda says, we have a historical duty to look inside Haiti and help to restore our glory. And one of the ways we can do that is to share whatever little prosperity we may have with Haitians. They're human beings. They're not political fodder. They're human beings. And we in Guyana have to play our part with the rest of our sisters and brothers in the Caribbean. And so it is within that context that I would like us to have this conversation on Haiti tonight. This conversation on what the government of Guyana has done. Denying Haitians entry to Guyana, which could become the most prosperous Caribbean country economically because of our recent oil find. And at that moment, our government is turning its back on Haitians, our fellow Caribbean brothers and sisters. Now we understand the whole question of immigration and what it means. We understand the whole question of human trafficking and what that means for other countries. We understand all of that. And any government will have to deal with the question of migration, will have to deal with the question of human trafficking. But when we decided that we are going to stand together as one Caribbean community, we all did that with the understanding that there will be intra-Caribbean migration. And that is why the Caribbean Single Market and Economy made provisions for intra-Caribbean migration. And so therefore, at the formal level, at the political level, there are provisions for migration. We ask the question, why pick on Haiti? You walk around Georgetown and other parts of the country, and you see our sisters and brothers from Cuba. And Cuba has been good to the Caribbean and good to Guyana. And so the Cubans also have a right to enjoy whatever little benefits there are in Guyana to be shared. We see our brothers and sisters from Brazil, from Venezuela, from Colombia, in Guyana. And we know that wherever there is mass migration, it comes with other ills. We're not closing our minds to that. But why expel the Haitians and not the others? You have to explain that. And our government has not given an explanation. And as I said when I touched on this topic last week, those of us who are Africans have a right to lead a crusade of righteous indignation against this act by our government, and we must seek to turn it back. It's an act of ethnic cleansing, not cleaning out who are already here, but by denying others coming who are Africans, we are engaging in ethnic cleansing, in my opinion. Tonight, we're going to talk about all of this. We have assembled a panel that is able to discuss this issue, to give you the kind of perspectives that you need as we take on this latest task of pushing back against the overreach of a government that has been installed against the will of all of Guyana. Our panel tonight, Mr. Darren Wade, a young attorney at law, who's making a name for himself, defending the defenseless. We have Mr. Aubrey Norton, members of the People's National Congress, and himself a political analyst. And Mr. Kilaki Amsterdam, member of the Working People's Alliance and host of Bostonian Morning Time. Gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to Politics 101.
Somebody has run more than one system. Darren, you can't check the system. You need to mute your mic. Please mute your mic.
Darren, let me start with you. I mentioned in my introduction that this problem is not new. The PPP has been trying to get Haitians not to come into Guyana. I know you were involved a year ago, and you are involved now. Give us a background of the PPP's attempts in the recent past to deny Haitians the right to migrate to Guyana.
Right. Good and your audience, brother. I definitely is happy to be here this evening to share with your audience and to Guyana. So and the Asian, what the Asians are going. First of all, Guyana has an obligation. Some is feeding back. Guyana has an obligation under the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas to all CARICOM nationals. Haiti being a full member of CARICOM, the nationals are entitled, based on the 2007 agreement by the heads of government, at least 6 months upon entry. What we have witnessed in Guyana over from last December to now are that Haitians are coming to Guyana and are being harassed by the immigration. They are being harassed by the authorities and by the police. There's an issue of smuggling. I would like to debunk that argument, because smuggling is if you enter a country illegally for some financial means and so on. All of the Haitians that come to Guyana, in my understanding, or majority of them, they come through legal ports of entry. There's no issue of Haitian being smuggled into Guyana. As I would have mentioned before, and under Article 7 of the Revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, and Article 8. Article 7 deals with the non-discrimination of members. And it said within the scope and application of this treaty and without prejudice to any special provision contained herein, any discrimination on nationality shall be prohibited. Any discrimination. The committee shall, after consultation with competent organ, establish rules to prohibit such discrimination. Then there's the issue of most favored nation treatment. Subject to the provision of this treaty, each member shall, with respect to any rights covered by this treaty, accord to another member state no less favorable accord to a third member state or a third state. So what that is saying, in relation to most favored nation, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, or any other Caribbean country, if you are saying that 80 Haitians must have visa to come to Guyana, then Trinidadians must require a visa to enter to Guyana. If not, you are infringing the Haitians' rights on the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. That is certainly not the case. There is a case of discrimination. As I would have also mentioned, the 2007 agreement that says all members, all nationals are entitled to 6 months stay upon entry. And that right is only extended to members who it is not extended to economic nationals. You know, there's some Caribbean countries that sells their nationality. So Asians who are not economic citizens, but I don't think Haiti sells its nationality. I don't think they have that program there. Upon entry to Guyana, they're entitled to at least 6 months stay. It is my respectful opinion that the government of Guyana, the state of Guyana, is acting unlawfully. I believe that the visa requirement is ultra vires. It has no legal grounding in relation to our laws and our treaty obligation to Haiti as a country.
Thank you very much for that legal opinion there, Darren. Aubrey, let me bring you in. From a purely political perspective, Aubrey Norton, what do you think is the subtext of all of this? Is Aubrey with us? Aubrey, is Aubrey with
Yes,
us?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
I am there. Are you
Yeah, I
hearing
was
me?
asking you about what is the subtext of all of this. If
I
we
heard
accept
the
what
question.
Darren has pointed out about the treaty obligations vis-a-vis CARICOM, the Chaguaramas treaty, what is the subtext behind the PPP's behavior?
Okay. I was saying, first of all, one has to go back. If one looks at within the 5 years when the PPP was in opposition, they consistently asked in Parliament how many Haitians were in Guyana. At the same time that there were people from Bangladesh, there were people from India, and there were people from Venezuela all around. They had an obsession with Haitians. From the time they came to power, they have been using immigration to harass Haitians. Now, what one can conclude from that is that there is a political motive. I also believe that one has to take it in the context of discrimination in Guyana. There are two categories of people that are being discriminated in Guyana against. Those that are considered African Guyanese and those that are conceived APNU, AF, the other, for instance, indigenous peoples, Indo-Guyanese. And so you have a situation in Guyana where the regime is clearly interested in domination and control of the Afro-Guyanese community, and anybody who is perceived to be supportive or in alliance with the APNU AFC. So when one looks at the treatment of Haitians, we know full well that the lawyers in the PPP know that one is against the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. They know it is against integration. They know full well that they are doing the wrong thing. And so it is their political agenda that matters. Now, also recognize that in the Rupununi, because there are categories of Haitians that are coming, some end up staying, some are onward to Brazil and other places, the Rupununi. You look at the people who control the trafficking in person in the Rupununi area, you will see some of them are prominent people. And while you might believe it is solely a visa restriction, I think it is also linked to trafficking in people. Because what they will do, having now said you have to get a visa, they not only restrictions, but and when the PPP in the Rupununi and other places want a of Haitians to do business in Brazil or other places, they will speak to their regime, and the regime will grant only those visas. What that does is accentuate the PPP's control of trafficking in Haitians, while at the same time precluding hard-working Haitians to come here like coming. Part of the corruption mechanism, because that many of the people that are allegedly involved trafficking of people openly linked to the People's Progressive Party, and therefore they are creating a mechanism for control of the Haitians that come through and the increase in economic power of their actors in the Rupununi. I wanted to make that point. Then one also has to recognize that there's another campaign ongoing in Guyana. It's a campaign of psychological warfare against African Ghanese. They are make African Ghanese and impotent as if they can challenge anything. And when they do what they are doing to the Haitians, they are sending a signal that, look, one of the people is oppression in the world, we are going to deprive them and oppress them. And so the people who know the history of Haiti and understand context will be psychologically affected by this clear, brazen attempt to prevent CARICOM, a particular set of CARICOM citizens, from coming to Guyana and seeking a better life. They also are establishing that, look, we are powerful. We could do as we like. Venezuela, who we has a territorial controversy with, and we should be careful as to who comes, because you can have agents granted, etc., against their interests. They are showing no interest in slowing the flow of Venezuelans. In fact, they are meting out assistance. And when you talk to some PPP people, they are of the view that Africans who come here will vote AP and UFC, but other ethnic groups that come will vote PPP. And so one or other see it in the context of their election gerrymandering. They are doing a number of things gerrymandering here in Guyana, and the ethnic issue, as it relates to the Haitian, takes center stage when it comes to dealing with Haiti. So there is a general trend that says we will make Black people uncomfortable. We will make Black people feel hopeless. We will make Black people feel second class. We will dominate and control. And the only Africans that are going to be allowed to live some amount of free life are those who go to the PPP, supportive of the PPP, and do what the PPP want. Just look at who was chosen, well, in keeping with the alleged constitution, to write saying the Police Service Commission to cause why they shouldn't be fired, when they know all of that was not within the confines of the law. They chose Mark Phillips. When they wanted to say public servants, you have to go back to work, they chose another house slave, Kwame. And then there are others that they chose Joe Hamilton. So they are a perception of Africans in the minds of Africans. Now, the refusal of assistance from Trinidad and Tobago in the time of flooding really came down to politics and race. They were annoyed because Prime Minister Rowley made a point of fact that Guyana has this large amount of vaccines because they didn't restrict it to WHO approved vaccine. That was a matter of fact. But then they got the Indian dominated UNC in Trinidad to use people to attack. And then they came out and said they weren't accepting the assistance. Now, remember, just before that, they were talking about good relations with CARICOM and Trinidad. But suddenly, one act ruptures the entire relationship. So one has to see a general trend. The firing of Black public servants is also a manifestation. I pointed out on this program that with the COVID relief, the people that were deprived were the African Guyanese. With the land issue, when the government said that anybody who got land under the APNU, AFC will have to give it back or face the courts. They decided the African Guyanese will go before the courts, but other ethnic groups that got, and mind you, I believe all ethnic groups were entitled to get land under the government. Where the problem comes is when you say the African Guyanese have to give them back, you identify, name them, and proceed to take legal action against them, while Indo-Guyanese that got in the same process, you did not do anything about it. That establishes beyond doubt that the regime is bent on destroying the economic, whatever economic base exists of African Guyanese. Now, today I understand Justice George ruled that those African Guyanese who challenged them and who got lands in Enmore, Wales, and LBI, I gather the judge ruled that those lands were legally obtained and therefore nobody has to give them back. And I gather she has set 16th August to give judgment on cost. Now, we saw the Police Service Commission matter, where again, it is clear that ethnicity played a role above any other variable. Of course, I will add individually that so did in fact stand up for principle years ago, and they had a problem with Slow because he is an African Guyanese who doesn't fit into the dependency, control, domination syndrome. But generally, I am seeing what I call in an article that I wrote a few months ago, a creeping apartheid. And this creeping apartheid is aimed at destroying whatever economic base exists. It's aimed at destroying any political force that is perceived to be close to the APNU AFC and the APNU AFC itself. It is seeking to destroy the psyche of the African, to place them at the point where they believe they are hopeless. I want to close by saying, I am explaining and pointing out these things to unravel the PPP's plot to dominate African Guyanese and to dominate and marginalize Indo-Guyanese and indigenous peoples who they perceive to be supportive of or members of the APNU AFC. Now, I believe Guyana is for all Guyanese. And this issue of the Haitian has to be confronted because Guyana took a foreign policy position years ago that it will promote regional integration. We moved from simple regional integration and expanded into hassle-free travel, permission for nationals to come for 6 months without a visa. When you are rescinding this, you are pushing back regional integration. And then if you and Barbados get wrong, then you will say Bajans can't come. And then you will say Trinidadians can't come and be selective with who Trinidadians you allow to come. Look, we have to face reality. The People's Progressive Party is one, on a witch hunt. Two, it is in a process aimed at total domination and control and seeking to take the fight out of African Guyanese. And to do the Haitians that is really a symbolic act to see some of the greatest fighters against oppression we will deal with like that. But I want to remind the PPP regime that they are not as powerful as the South African regime was when it had real apartheid and dominated the community. The African community resisted and got out of it. In the first 23 years, the last 23 years of the PPP rule, they executed more than 1,400 African Guyanese. And we confronted them and succeeded. And we will confront them and succeed. We will carry an international campaign to ensure we succeed. They might have killed Crummy Wing, but they have not killed the desire of the African Guyanese to live in a country equal with all other Guyanese of all other ethnic groups. They have not killed the desire of African Guyanese to be not dominated, and they cannot kill that spirit. They might kill one and two of us, but like Burnham once said, if you kill one, another Rasta can take my place.
Thank you very much, Aubrey Norton. Kadaki Amsterdam, let me bring you in here. Aubrey Norton has made the point that the banning of Asians is part of a larger agenda of ethnic domination and ethnic exclusion. What do you think about that? We're not hearing you. We're not hearing you.
Good evening, Dr. Hines. Good evening, fellow panelists. Thank you, viewers, for allowing me into your space. Let me start by saying, what do I think? I think, first and foremost, Darren Wade is correct when he says that he believes that this recent quote-unquote amendment to the laws of Guyana to require visa travel for Haitians is unconstitutional. Because, like you rightly pointed out, in my mind, Guyana being a part of the Caribbean single market and economy, which guarantees free travel and automatic 6-month stay. When I think it was 2019, when the Granger administration made the necessary changes to the law to allow the Haitians this free travel, I think they were simply meeting their requirement as part of the CSME arrangement. Domination, yes. I certainly believe that the behavior of the PPP is in its entire campaign to dominate Black people in particular, but dominate Guyana as a whole. This is about electoral numbers. This is about winning elections. This is about claiming a majority. And in so doing, I am positive that this is so because I've been looking at the statements coming out of the PPP. And what we've been seeing all the time are shifting goalposts. I want to quote a number of articles, just about 3 in the interest of time, to point out where the PPP has been shifting the goalpost in terms of the Haitian matter. All of us should be aware that when the PPP were in opposition, they accused the coalition government of using the Haitians to pad the voters list. That was their first cry. That their concern with Haitians coming here was that the coalition was going to use them and was using them to pad the voters list in order to maintain a majority when the elections come. In relation to that, let me quote from the Kaicho News. The Kaicho News of August 3, the headline was Influx of Haitians, a case of massive people smuggling. Granger should break the silence. The PPP has called for a full-fledged investigation into the issue of the thousands of Haitians who are coming in but do not appear to be leaving. The party called for the disclosure to be openly condemned. This was a disclosure made by Minister Felix. Quote, Minister of Citizenship Winston Felix has been quoted as saying that he believes that the Haitians are using Guyana as a stepping stone to other countries, including Brazil, Suriname, and French Guiana. It is alarming that this is the position of a minister who should be concerned with the correlated issues of national security and human trafficking, the statement said. Most importantly in this article, the PPP pointed out the recent statement of Finance Minister Winston Jordan, who was reported as saying if foreigners were prepared to cut grass for $1,000, but Guyanese natives wanted to cut grass for $1,500, then it's natural that the foreigners will be employed. The opposition said at that time that that position of Minister Jordan was effectively supporting displacement of Guyanese from the job market. When it was recorded that there were 30,000 jobs lost, of course, that was propaganda. Further, the party said it is primarily worried, and I want to draw keen attention to this statement. It is primarily worried that these foreign nationals are being issued with Guyanese documents, which would allow them to be registered as eligible Guyanese voters in the ongoing house-to-house registration being done by the Guyana Elections Commission. Quote, the plan afoot seems to be one that envisages the padding of the voters list with fictitious persons, an old rigging tactic reminiscent of the PNC time in office from the 1960s. That was August 3, 2019. On August 5th, 2019, there was another story in Kaicho News, right? Which pointed, again, which the PPP were quoted. However, with the Haitians, it became evident that something else has been happening. For more than 7 months, scores of Haitians have been coming here daily. The opposition believe that they are being registered by the government as part of a plan to boost their support in preparations for elections. Right? Good. Those are two articles which point to the fact that the PPP, while it was in opposition, was claiming, look, the Haitians coming to Guyana is going to create a problem for us in terms of electoral numbers. Because they're black, the coalition is predominantly a black party, and so they're using them to pad the list. That is a direct threat to the PPP's claim that they have a superior number in the country and that they can win elections based on the Indian support. The statisticians will tell you that the Indian populace in Guyana has been declining because families have been leaving in droves since the PPP were in office prior to 2015, and even now that the PPP are back in office. And so that quote-unquote superior number that they had is diminishing, right? Their response to that diminishing number is to some extent twofold. One, leading up to the elections, declarations, and so on, Alan Nandlal was quoted as saying, they're going to make black people run out of this country. So all of the discriminatory tactics that we're seeing now are aimed at forcing black people out of this country so that PPP can maintain a superior number in terms of its Indian base. That plan would be scuttled if Haitians are allowed to come into the country and, like they say, seek citizenship and get registered as Guyanese citizens. That will scuttle their plan to reduce the black numbers in this country. So here it is now. They're claiming that, look, I saw an article recently where Nandlal says that the imposition of this visa requirement was out of a fear that Guyana would be labeled as facilitating human trafficking. because they're now taking this position that all of these Haitians which are coming and quote unquote allegedly can be accounted for are being trafficked. If it is, this administration is concerned about human trafficking. The Haitians are not at the most risk of being trafficked. As a matter of fact, when you talk about human trafficking in this country, the Haitians are perhaps the least among the victims. Let me quote another article from 2018. And this came out of the Trafficking in Persons Task Force. Since 2018, Guyana has seen a drastic increase in the number of immigrants and non-nationals who are victims of trafficking in persons. And the situation has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which hit Guyana since March. This was the heart of a virtual panel discussion held by the Ministry of Social Protection last Wednesday. This is an article, July 30th, 2020, as the agency continues its week-long observances. This is what the agency declared. In 2019, from 25 reports, some 140 trafficking in persons victims were rescued. Over 90% were Venezuelans. Over 90% were Venezuelans. The number also included Haitians and Cubans, while few Guyanese were among them. The latest figures are in stark contrast to figures from 2014 to 2017, showing an astronomical increase. So remember, in 2018, in 2019, as a matter of fact, the reports showed that 90% of persons who were trafficked were Venezuelans. But it's Guyana insisting on curbing the influx of Venezuelans? Is this government insisting on curbing the influx of Venezuelans? Are they insisting on the visa requirement for Venezuelans to come to this country? No. Despite the fact that Guyana has territorial difficulties with Venezuela. Guyana has a border controversy with Venezuela. And like Bobby rightly said, Venezuela poses or Venezuelans pose a more serious threat to the well-being of Guyana because they are at wrath over a border. And so a lot of the people who are allowed to come into this country from Venezuela can be military persons, they can be spies. And so they pose a greater risk. But is this government trying to restrict the influx of Venezuelans? No. As a matter of fact, and I said it earlier in this week on one of my programs, it was the PPP who accepted money from the International Organization of Migration to resettle Venezuelans here. Right? To resettle Venezuelans here. And if you look around the society, if you go to the strip clubs, it is Venezuelans, Colombians, Cubans, as the boys say, Spanish, and that includes some Brazilians, who are in the strip clubs, who are being controlled. Their movements are being controlled. And so in actuality, they are the ones who are being trafficked. Let the authorities tell you how many Haitians have been found among that number. And when you look at that, then one is left to conclude nothing else. That this is a cloak and dagger dance by the PPP to simply prevent Haitians from coming to this country because they see them as creating a possible threat in terms of a growing black population in Guyana, which will reduce the possibility of them being oppressed and reduce the possibility of the PPP claiming superior numbers in the elections. And that is what it is. Like you said, ethnic cleansing, nothing else.
And one, of course, is reminded of a similar policy in the United States, which was heavily protested by African Americans, whereby Cubans were allowed to come to Miami while Haitians were turned back. Many Haitians died in that trip back and forth from Haiti. And of course, America was doing that both for ideological and racial reasons. And the African American community stood up against that kind of, especially the conversation now, what to do. Darren, you are the lawyer here. You have raised the question of the unconstitutionality of this act. What to do on that front?
Thank you very much for your question, Dr. Hines. Before I answer your question, I want to point out something. Because both Mr. Norton and Mr. Amsterdam would have said this, that there's a controversy between Guyana and Venezuela in relation to the border. My respectful legal opinion is there's no controversy, and that is also Guyana's case, which is a non-political issue in Guyana. There's no controversy in relation to Guyana and Venezuela border. This issue was settled in the 1899 arbitral award. So there's no controversy in relation to our border since 1899. I don't want to put that out there. Because there's things whereby the Venezuelan could use whatever we're saying as some sort of evidence. I will now turn to the issue of what could be done. Certainly, the revised treaty of Chagueral-Ramos stipulates that all issues in relation to the interpretation and application of the revised treaty of Chagueral-Ramos, the CCJ, the Caribbean Court of Justice, has sole jurisdiction in relation to those issues. Our local courts, if there's any issues that arise that in relation to the interpretation and application of the revised treaty of Chagueral-Ramos, will have to stay that aspect of the proceedings and refer it to the CCJ for determination. It's very respectful persons. We can approach our local court, challenging the award, not the award, challenging the determination by the president, Ifan Ali, we say is installed and unlawful, challenging the decision he made to impose, or rather, the visa for Asian nationals, challenging in our local courts, and our court will have to reform. Okay, that's one option. A second option is to go to the Caribbean Court of Justice, challenging it. This will have to be probably done by an Asian national or so on, or AT. What we have noticed over the year, the Asian government has shown little interest in relation to this issue. I believe that's one area the PPP may feel that they get on their side. The Asian government will not challenge it. But what will need to be done is at least to write a letter to the Haitian government and give them and ask them if you could go on behalf of this person. And if they have not responded, then you could go to CG and say, look, we made attempts, we approached the Asian government, but they would have failed and or neglected to support our cause, or to say, no, we're not going, you go ahead. We are going to support you from behind. So I believe those are the options that are legal options that are available in relation to the treatment of the Haitians. Certainly, the government may argue smuggling, but as I would have already said to you, smuggling is only happen when you enter the country illegally, unlawfully. But all of the Haitians, or majority of the Haitians that comes to Guyana, is even if they use Guyana as a transshipment point, they want to go to another country. My understanding is that when they arrive at the Brazilian border, like how the US had a similar arrangement with the Cubans, where they stamp them in, they are given a refugee status immediately upon entry at Brazil. So you come to Guyana, which is totally lawful. Once in Guyana, you could go any port in Guyana. The Haitians are not limited. They are not limited to Georgetown because Lethem is part of Guyana, isn't it? So you go to Lethem, and I have been to Brazil before. And I don't know if you ever used the Lethem, the bridge or what have you. As a Guyanese, I am not required a passport or either anything to go into Bovista. You just drive over. I believe there's some point that you will leave in Bovista whereby you have to your travel documents and so on. But once you in that area of Brazil, it's totally lawful for you to just walk right across, however you want. So what my understanding is that Asians, they will go to the border and go straight to the booth, to the immigration booth there on the opposite side, on the Brazilian Africa, and they will stamp in to Brazil because of the arrangement Brazil has for them. That's my understanding in relation to the Brazil law in relation to refugees. I would have brought legal action before challenging the way our Asians were treated in Guyana, and we would have won the case on behalf of the Asians. However, the court at that point they did not refer it to the CCJ. They were issued a person who I know sometimes we are our own enemies. We had them cornered. We had Andy Nandala saying that the Asians are not entitled to any rights, and a set of nonsense. He later retracted his statement on a program in Trinidad, whereby he acknowledged that Haiti is a CARICOM, a full CARICOM member state, and they're entitled to all the rights and privileges as a CARICOM national or as CARICOM nationals. So, in my respectful opinion, the CCJ is available to the Asians in challenging this unlawful action by the Guyanese authorities. I can't believe if it's you, Brother Hines, would have raised the issue before. I don't know, but that's why Guyana would have shared with me, did not join the what we call it back then, the Federation, the West Indian Federation.
The West Indian Federation, yes.
I believe it was Chedi Jagan the Great.
Yes.
Who believe the old number game. So historically, that if they allow us to become the part of the West Indian Federation, then we will outnumber the Indians and so on in Guyana. So this is always a number game, as both Mr. Amsterdam and Mr. Norton would have rightly said with the PPP. They're afraid of being outnumbered. So we're going to keep out the Asians. We're going to allow the Pakistanis and a section of Trinidad, because there are a lot of Trinidadians in Guyana investing and doing business. But those Trinidadians here are from Central and South Trinidad, in the UNC dominated area. That's where they could get a former member of the UNC government who was removed by the UNC because it's quote unquote fraudulent dealings in government, to attack the Prime Minister in Trinidad and attack persons in Guyana here, views down. Because that's how they deal with things, views down. So it's disheartening. It is sad what we're seeing. I would have listened to Asian who did a video complaining of what is transpiring, where he said Asian ancestors built Guyana. And and he's correct. Because when the indentured laborers came, and we are afraid to say these things, but we must be able and matured enough to have open conversation. Because history will tell you, and I believe it was Alvin Thompson. What guy is his historian name? Is it Alvin Thompson? Professor?
Yes, Professor Thompson.
Yes. In the days of slavery, or if we're going to go prior, before this area was occupied, the French saw, the British, the Spanish, no one else but the Dutch and the irrigation knowledge was able to colonize this aspect, because it's called the Wild Coast. And they used African slaves who used their bare hands and sticks, and the doggy conservancies, they built the seed walls, all of the canals. And in those days, the slaves under the Dutch, in Dutch, it was short and brutish than any other part of the Caribbean where slave went through in this part in those days, because they had to build the foundation of this country and what others come and enjoy. And certainly, and I have no problem with others enjoying it, but we must acknowledge the contribution that our people play. And the Asians, when a ship left the coast in Africa there, Ghana, Mali, wherever, when they left to come here, we don't know, some dropped off in Guyana, some go there. You don't know a grandfather was there, a mother gone there, because we were chattel. Just like what we because akin to what happens, with cow, you sell the calf, you sell to different farmers. That's how it was. If a slave misbehave in Guyana, you sell him to a plantation in Haiti. So the Asian gentleman who I listened to today that said that his food for others built Guyana is correct. They contributed to the growth of Guyana. Because the only difference between a slave in Guyana, a slave in Haiti, a slave in the United States, with the various colonies they had here, is where we went. We all went through the same struggle.
Aubrey Norton, let me bring you in here on this issue of what to do. We know there have been calls in the past year from your constituency to stand up against this barrage by the PPP. Every week there is some onslaught on the population that the segment of the population that is supportive of your party and your coalition. Here again is a blatant issue of discrimination, and it's an affront to the dignity of Black people. What to do? What to do, Aubrey?
Before I turn to what to do, I have to correct Darren. I never said border controversy. I said territorial controversy. I spent a long time in the foreign ministry having to use the correct language. So, be very specific about what I said. Having said that, is that engaging first, actually you can engage the Haitian government to bring some amount of consciousness to them. We also, I think, have to engage and ask Diana to live by the treaty they were sent. I also believe that legal action has to be taken against the government of Guyana. But having said all of that, I'm a firm believer.
Mr. Moderator, we seem to be having some difficulty there with Mr. Norton. Kiraki, let me bring you in the meantime. And I'm posing the same question to you. What do we do? Here is another blatant act by the government, in a sense, thumbing their noses at the African section of the population, violating the law. What to do?
What to do? Few words, close ranks. Guyanese, Black people have to close ranks. We have to close ranks around the Asians. We have to resist this visa imposition to start with. And while resisting the visa imposition, we have to find, quote unquote, novel ways of ensuring that the Haitians get the right to free travel. Many of us, many families, Guyanese families, are in the US and Canada and the UK, all over the place, because in many instances they were sponsored to get there. Their visas were sponsored. They were sponsored by in some instances, strangers. Guyanese have to start sponsoring Haitian families to come to Guyana as part of the pushback. It's as simple. We just have to come up with different ways to deal with this situation. And it must be multi-pronged. We must insist. We must agitate for this illegal government to get rid of that visa requirement. And while we are doing that, we must protect those Haitians who are here. And we must also find ways and means of allowing others who so desire to come here. That's my simple answer. That's what we ought to do. And the lawyers, like Darren, hats off to Darren. The lawyers, I said very early in this issue, because it has CARICOM implications. Somebody ought to go to the CCJ and challenge it. And so I'm saying that our legal luminaries, forget, it's your profession, it's your career, it's how you earn. But sometimes you have to get some free work done. Forget the fees. Put in the work and fight for the freedom of these people, because they have fought for the freedom of our people. Just like Kofi and the others, they have all fought for the freedom of our people. And in this era, we cannot continue to allow this wicked and vindictive set of people to oppress people simply because of the color of their skin and their continued belief that they have a right to dominate Guyana. That's my solution.
Is Aubrey back with us? If he's not, let me go back to you, Darren. There are reports surface that Dominica and Barbados are taking similar action against Haitians 2 or 3 years ago. What is different between those actions on the part of those two countries and the action taken by Guyana?
I I I would have stopped out there for short for about 2 3 seconds. Can you please rephrase the question for me, sir?
No, I'm saying reports have surfaced that Barbados and Dominica took similar action against Haitians 2 or 3 years ago. What is different between those actions by those two governments and the action taken by our government?
To be honest, I'm aware the Barbados is, but I believe they quickly removed it because I believe the Beijing back then realized that that imposition was unlawful, and they would have removed that requirement for Asians. So it is my respectful view now that Barbados, based on my understanding, that requirement no longer exists or subsists in Barbados in relation to Asians requiring.
We've lost your audio.
Yes, my apologies. Someone try calling me there before. Yes, my understanding is at this moment, and I could be corrected, that they're no longer required to require a visa to travel to Barbados because the Barbados, the government there, the authorities there would have recognized that it was unlawful. I believe Mia, when she get into to government, would have changed that requirement. That's my understanding. I can be corrected in relation to that. I'm not fully read in relation to that requirement. And if that is the case in Barbados, that it still subsists, it is unlawful. And Barbados should know very well in relation to the Shanice Myries case.
Yes.
That they make pronouncements in relation to boys not being harassed and the entitlement to free movement.
Do you think, Darren, there is enough pushback on the part of Guyanese on this issue from your movements across the city where you are most of the time? Do you think Guyanese are tuned in to this issue enough to want to protest against it?
Yes. I believe a lot of these Afro Guyanese are not happy with what is transpiring, not only with the Haitian matter. They believe that they are being attacked. There are people who believe they're being attacked. There are people who believe that they're not adequately represented also. So my fear is that one day this country may break loose. Just on the people on the ground, issues in their own. So yes, I believe that the people, but there is of the reluctance. If you call them and say, okay, let us, there are reluctance of persons to come forward. Okay, I am going to do this. And so on. I believe one gentleman out to me though, of his willingness to file a quota. So we are currently examining the legal options in relation to challenging the unlawful of this visa requirement for Asian.
Aubrey, is this matter being engaged by the official opposition?
I think it is being engaged. We have to look at it. We are looking at it. But I believe, like I said earlier, I don't know what part you heard of what I said previously. When I started by saying I said territorial controversy and not border.
We didn't hear much beyond that.
Okay. Well, what I said in essence is that the PPP only understand political action, and political action together with legal action is what is going to have to be taken. I also believe that Anil Nandlal is manifesting an unbelievable dishonesty. The same things he argued against when he was in opposition, he's now coming to argue against them while he's in government. I mean, it's an unimaginable piece of this. One would assume if like you did when you carried the case of Carvillard against then President Granger. Now, when the same thing comes with the Police Service Commission and this present government, you turn around and argue against what you argue on one. It's an unbelievable dishonesty. There are not words to describe this kind of political foolishness. And I believe that Anil has to be focused on. Because when a man arrives at a point where he believes that he is so bright, competent, or downright stupid, that you could have argued against something, and now come with a similar case and seeking to argue against it and achieve your objective, then our politics is in deep trouble. It means there is no principle. There are no basic understandings. And so I believe the only thing that can bring such people to their senses is political action. When a man says he's a factory and goes on, he's also signaling to you that he thinks he can do you what he like whenever he like because he's powerful. And that behavior, I think, has to be challenged because it is no good for Guyana. It is not good for even he himself. Because there must be compunction if he has a conscience. There must be a pricking of his conscience. And so I believe political action is necessary. I believe legal action is necessary. I also believe international action is necessary because the world at this stage, having lived through the Trump era, where people try to, in the presence of facts, create their own narrative, would have created an environment to challenge that. And I believe on the same ground, internationally, we need to challenge what is happening here. I also believe that the time has come when APNU AFC supporters must make PPP leaders uncomfortable wherever they go. Because to accommodate them, really and truly, is probably signaling to them that we are comfortable with all the nonsense you are doing. I saw a picture of what it is alleged is Charles Ramson visiting a community with a big gun in his back, exposed so the cameras can see. Like if he believe anybody will be afraid of him. I mean, when you arrive at that point, you are really and truly taking the society backward. No one would believe that a government minister will operate like he in the Wild West with a big pistol in his back, talking to people. So the people who are behind and seeing must believe, oh Lord, he's a bad man. Well, there are people with machine guns and people who believe in their rights took them on. And so I believe we have to take this regime on. The solution, there's little or no hope for any reform. You had 23 years. You went out of power. One would have thought you would have reflected and come with a more kind of moderate approach that even creates some semblance that you have an interest in Africans, but you come worse than you were before. You blatantly say, look, Guyanese got lands under the APNU AFC. We are going to take away the African lands because they got it under the APNU AFC, and the Africans can go to hell. You come back and blatantly, you take relief, you give it to one set of group. There's a PPP woman who was seen biting a policeman who tried to uphold the law, and they believe he had the right to intervene so that she be charged. He didn't believe he had the right. Now there's an incident in which they're showing half of the video, in which, in my opinion, there were two sets of wrongs. I don't believe anybody should be assaulted. But then you arrive at a point where you only deal with where the policeman assault occurred, and you forget all the other assaults. You refuse to show the total video, but you almost immediately place an African Guyanese policeman under house arrest after a PPP thug drank rum allegedly, was not in control, and therefore had to be restrained. When you do things like that, you are saying to the society there is no scope for fairness. At least at minimum, that policeman should have been heard, rather than Errol Watts saying he will face the full force of the law, as is reported. I don't know that he said that, but it is reported that he said that. And a policeman should not do that. A policeman should know if an incident occurs, you take statements. You get the facts. You hear both sides. Then you send it to the appropriate authority for it to be dealt with. But to satisfy your PPP masters, you proceed to do X, Y, and Z. Lawyers on behalf of this young man should be filing action against the Guyana Police Force. One of the first things you learn in constitutional law is something called, if I remember the Latin, alteram partem, meaning the right to hear the other side. You are depriving people of their right to a hearing and proceeding to act based on pure political thinking. I believe we have arrived at the point where political action has to be taken to ensure we pull back this regime and then change them. Because it is also evident that the only solution to this is a new election and a new government. The People's Progressive Party has shown no willingness, no interest in governing in the interest of all the people of Guyana. And the African Guyanese in the PPP have shown that they are comfortable with the house slave rule. They're not even prepared to say that one thing is wrong that the PPP would have done. They weren't prepared to say, how could you ask the blacks who get lands to give it back or face the court, but you didn't ask Indo-Guyanese who got to do the same thing. It is blatant, open racism. When the PPP is going to deal with lands in PPP areas, they go meet the people, talk with them, and try to find a solution. Once as African Guyanese, they come with a bulldozer, as we saw behind North Rheinveld. We saw how they dealt with the Rosinante co-ops. We saw how they're dealing with people in co-ops. They went to Ithaca and took away equipment that was bought for an African village that they deprived of resources throughout their life. Not only one time, throughout their life as a government. They went and took away that equipment so that those people can farm and ensure you put them in an economic straitjacket? Who, with a good conscience, will accommodate that? Who, with a good conscience, will say that that is right? I am saying, I agree with Kadaki, we need to close ranks. We need to organize ourselves, and we need to take on the People's Progressive Party. And the new young leaders in the parties should take the lead in terms of doing that. Some of our leaders have passed the stage where they can actually protest. And so we can't expect them to do it. But the new young leadership should take on this regime, expose them to the international world, expose them at home, take them on, and then let's dispose of them. That is the option that exists. I mean, you see some ridiculous things. A man goes to do an analysis of deaths, and I don't know if intentionally or skillfully, he puts that a high percentage of Africans are dying in the COVID hospital. He didn't say dying from COVID. So if there's a large percentage who decide they're going to the hospital, the numbers will change. But clearly one of the objectives was to scare the African Guyanese into taking a vaccine. Now the APNUAFC has long agreed that people should take the vaccine. But we are clear in our heads. The corruption that was involved, you cannot vouch for the vaccine. You don't even know if it is a potent vaccine. You don't even know if it's a vaccine at all, because the middle people that were used, as you were seeing from the information coming across, that they are all compromised and involved in illegalities. The Guyanese are showing some interest in the Cuban vaccine. So our position has always been, yes, people must take the vaccine, but we should not run down the road of fighting with a Sputnik that you don't even know if it's a Sputnik because of the corruption involved. But every attempt is being made to force you into a position. And so you can run the whole plethora of issues and see an orchestrated attempt by the Ali government, by the Ali regime, to oppress and suppress the African Guyanese community. And if perchance an Indo or Afro-Guyanese is sympathetic to or in association with, then they too must face the consequences. We need a Guyana in which all Guyanese feel part and parcel of the society and have a stake in this economic cake that we have. We cannot continue to allow the People's Progressive Party to go down the road of disenfranchising African Guyanese. I want to make this point. When we were in the negotiations during the Linden protests, when they murdered those 3 young men, we raised, and Sharma Solomon and company who were there can verify this, I raised with them the economics of Region 10 and said to them, we need to put the people of Region 10 into agriculture. I always remember Ashley Singh's response. Other people in other areas have a comparative advantage in agriculture, and therefore Region 10 shouldn't go into agriculture. Garbage. Utter nonsense. Every community should be allowed the scope and create the environment for them to produce the food they need. Because food is critical and it constitutes an economic activity, but not so. Who would remember or who would forget that for years Region 10 had no agricultural committee? It took the APNU AFC in government to put one in place so that something can be done for people in agriculture. And yet this regime tries to tell you that they have the interests of African Guyanese at heart. They don't. They see the African community as a community to be used, abused, controlled, and when you can't control, ultimately murder, as they have been doing. And that approach and perception has to change. While the AP and AFC was in government, there were actions to ensure that people don't feel marginalized, etc. And so I am convinced that we need to go in that direction. And every time you walk on the streets of Guyana, all our supporters say to us, we have to take on these people. They don't understand talk and press conference. And I agree.
As we come down to the end of the program, we have about 3 minutes. Kiraki Amsterdam closing remarks. Civil disobedience, non-cooperation. I am positive should be something that we put on the table. What says you? Kiraki?
Let me say, I am Mr. Protest, if you can say that. I am always for civil disobedience. Listen, like so many persons have said before, what this administration understands is first. What it understands is bullyism. I usually say this. The schoolyard bully steps back when somebody else stands up to him or her. And it is recognized that you could get beat up as a bully. Let me put it in layman terms. And that is what the PPP is accustomed to. Unless you're willing to push back against them, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And that is what they react to. When you react to their actions, that is when they come to the table. And that is when they're prepared to sit and negotiate and find solutions for the problems. And for as long as our leaders and our black communities are willing to sit back and accept this pacifier role, we're not going to get justice. Our Haitian brothers and sisters are not going to be treated fairly. Guyanese blacks will not be treated fairly. And therefore, the onus is on us to take affirmative action in whichever way, shape, or form we deem fit. That is what we have to do to get this government to respect us as a people and respect our leaders. And they'll talk, or the government talk about consultation before they enforce this visa requirement. Who did they consult with? The opposition represents almost 50% of this populace. Were they consulted with? No. So forget the diplomacy, or forget the diplomacy alone. You have to fight these people on variant fronts. That's my position.
And Darren Wade, you have the last word.
Certainly, I believe and I always support the issue of resistance. I often ask the question, where is the blood and tears of our forefathers? The struggle, where is that spirit? And I believe it lives within us. And sometimes we need somehow to resurrect that spirit of our forefathers to fight whatever ills we are going through. I believe the Haitians, they've shown their struggles in resistance. In Guyana, historically, we have also shown that we could fight our oppressors. And I'm always in agreement and support persons standing up for your rights. That's my view. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your rights. I believe that was Brother Bob's words. And I would like to end on that note. Get up, stand up for your rights.
Get up, stand up for your rights. And with that, we've come to the end of yet another edition of Politics 101. And we end on the note that it is time to get up and stand up for our rights. Those of you who are on this program, Kedaki, Aubrey, who belong to political parties, I suppose that's the word you should take back to your parties. We have not mentioned the Black organizations who have a role to play in all of this. I want to thank you all for coming on tonight and shedding some light on this issue. We leave tonight with one advice. We have to close ranks. We have to close ranks as organizations, as people, as Kedaki Amsterdam said. Two, that the time has come for non-cooperation and civil disobedience. The tactics surrounding that will have to be worked out by those who are the custodians of our support, meaning the political parties and the Black organization. I would like to throw out to those who hold our power that we should summon all the Black interest groups to a meeting to discuss civil disobedience and non-cooperation. To the wider Black community out there, we have to stop giving in to fear and alienation. We have every right to be disappointed with what has transpired these past 2 years. But it is time for us to stop mourning and to stop complaining and to take the bull by the horns. Now it's time for action. I've been convinced of that, and I'm more convinced as the weeks go by. We have to forget about those who will tell us that we are inciting people. We cannot incite people who are being trampled upon every day. It is our human right to live without fear in our own country. And so I want to call on Guyanese of all ethnicities tonight, but especially African Guyanese, to take very seriously, because the more you cuddle dictators, the more you cultivate dictators, the more you make excuses for dictators, the more you welcome them into your communities, the more they will trample upon you, because they will read your actions as a sign of weakness. And now it's time for us to rise up. We have to do so, of course, within the confines of human decency. We can't target people because of their political persuasion or because of their ethnicities. There's always a temptation to do that. Our target must be those who wield power. They use the power of the state. We use the power of the people. And there is power. There is economic power at our disposal. We can decide where and how we want to spend our monies. There is political power, the right to protest. The right to protest is a fundamental right, a fundamental human right. There is cultural power, the right to call upon the inner reaches of our being, the right to call upon the symbols of our culture. Emancipation is coming. What are we going to do this emancipation? Are we just going to beat our drums and sing and celebrate? Or are we going to turn this coming emancipation into a moment of rebuke of this government? Are we going to use this emancipation as a form of righteous indignation? What are we going to do? We don't always have to wait on the leaders to lead the way. Sometimes the people have to lead the way. We have to lead the way in our communities. Wherever we are, we have to find a way. This is too much. I have lived through most of our independence experience, not all of it. I've been a participant. I've come up against governments, but this government, this particular one, is of a different kind and a different stripe. And we cannot allow ourselves to be consumed by fear. We cannot allow ourselves to be consumed by this talk that what is happening to us will go away. It will not go away until we make it go away. We must send the messages to our leaders, but we also must send messages to ourselves. They can do what they're doing to the Haitians because they're doing the same thing to us. They can't expel us from Guyana, but what they can do is to expel us from equal and equitable citizenship. That we do not enjoy the rights and the privileges as others. That's an expulsion. So if we stand up for ourselves, we'll be standing up for the Haitians. The best way to stand up for the Haitians is to stand up for ourselves. I urge you tonight to answer this call of non-cooperation. Do not cooperate with the PPP. Do not allow them to come into your communities with footballs and give to you. That is over. Do not allow them to come in and to sweet talk you. That should be over. You have to do that in your communities. Non-cooperation and civil disobedience. I hope the call is heeded by those who have the capacity to organize our people. To organize our people. Don't wait for your leaders to come. Call them, and let them come to your communities and ground with you and work with you and give you that confidence that is needed to turn back the denials, to turn back the onslaught against us. That is our call as we move into the emancipation season. That this year emancipation must be a different one. Last year emancipation, the government that we voted for was booted out of office. This year emancipation must not be one that is blue and one that is full of doom. This year emancipation must be a fight back emancipation. Until the next time, David Hines thanking you for tuning in to yet another edition of Politics 101. And on Thursday, we will be dealing with another important topic we'll be dealing with the issue of the president taking on the Police Service Commission, using the office of the president to deny policemen and women their right to promotion. The Attorney General said the government will not honor the promotions that were legally recommended by the Police Service Commission. It is the president versus the Police Service Commission. It's a showdown. The government has declared war on the police force. And the rest of us as citizens have to take a stand. We'll talk about that on the next edition of Politics 101. Thank you and good night.